Most people don't lose because they're weak. They lose because they talk too much, explain too much, and chase attention instead of progress. If 2025 taught you anything, it should have taught you this. Noise is expensive. And in 2026, the cost of distraction will be higher than ever. This isn't a hype speech. This is a reality check. 2026 isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about tightening your circle, sharpening your focus, and moving in silence while the world stays loud. If you're serious about growth, real growth, then this year demands discipline, not announcements. What follows are 5 principles, not tips, not quotes. Principles that decide whether you level up quietly or stay stuck explaining yourself. Silence is rarely understood and its true value. Most people see it and assume it signals uncertainty, fear, or passivity. They hear a quiet room or a still person and immediately try to fill the space with words, opinions, or advice, as if the sound itself proves existence or worth. But in reality, silence is often the most intentional form of action, and those who recognize this quietly operate on a different level. Choosing to stay silent is not about hiding. It is about conserving energy, protecting ideas, and allowing the work to speak long before the explanation becomes necessary. It is a strategy grounded in cause and effect. When someone chooses to speak too soon, they are essentially leaking their energy, exposing their plans to opinions, and setting themselves up for distraction. Every time you announce a goal before it is accomplished, you invite outside forces into your process. Opinions arrive, advice arrives, sometimes even criticism, and each of these carries an invisible cost. It is not that people are malicious by default, but human behavior is such that people respond to what they know, what they perceive, and what they can influence. Before results exist, your vision is merely a story in someone else's mind. When that story becomes fodder for discussion, you trade focus for temporary validation. You trade mental clarity for noise, and you trade potential energy for fleeting recognition. These are quiet costs, subtle but cumulative, and over time, they erode the margin between someone who achieves and someone who merely hopes. I have observed this pattern repeatedly in everyday life. Consider the person who constantly posts updates about their business, their fitness journey, or their personal plans. Their followers offer encouragement, emojis, and comments which feel satisfying in the moment, but in the background their attention is shifted from execution to reception. Every response, every need for affirmation chips away at the mental bandwidth that could have been applied to strategy, problem solving, or refining skills. The most effective people understand this trade-off intuitively. They do not require applause for every small step, because they are oriented toward long-term value, not short-term recognition. They understand that the world tends to reward results, not intentions, and that results have a way of speaking louder than any explanation ever could. Silence also functions as a protective mechanism. Ideas are fragile in their early stages. They are untested, incomplete, and vulnerable to misinterpretation. Sharing prematurely exposes them to dilution. Someone might suggest a minor adjustment that distracts from the core strategy. Another might dismiss it entirely, causing self-doubt. Human behavior gravitates toward simplification. People instinctively react to what is tangible and familiar. Novelty or subtlety is met with skepticism. If you reveal a partially formed concept, you are inviting skepticism and interference, not support. Yet those who operate in quiet understand that patience is not a weakness. The ability to hold an idea internally, refine it, and act when the time is right multiplies its eventual impact exponentially. There is also a psychological mechanism at play when it comes to silence. Our brains are wired to feel a sense of progress when we talk about our intentions. Announcing that you are going to start a new habit, launch a project, or pursue a goal triggers small releases of dopamine, giving a sense of accomplishment before the action occurs. This neurological shortcut is deceptive. It feels productive, but it is actually a diversion. By engaging in verbal updates or constant explanations, people substitute motion for progress. The outcome is subtle but measurable. Energy is spent, motivation is temporarily satisfied, but actual results lag behind. In contrast, when someone chooses silence, they bypass the emotional shortcut. Their satisfaction is deferred, and their energy is preserved for execution, for the tedious, unglamorous work that results in real growth. Silence is also relational in its effect. People instinctively assign value based on availability and transparency. Those who reveal too much too soon or too often inadvertently dilute their influence. When your progress and strategy are internal, when you let results emerge without preamble, people are forced to respond to reality, not narrative. Influence becomes earned rather than explained. It is the difference between someone who constantly justifies their actions and someone whose accomplishments command attention because they are self-evident. In both personal and professional contexts, this shift changes dynamics. It cultivates respect without needing to demand it, and it reduces unnecessary friction caused by misunderstandings or premature judgments. The principle extends beyond obvious strategic situations into the fabric of everyday life. Consider friendships, family, and casual work relationships. People who are always explaining themselves often invite unnecessary opinions or emotional labor. They feel obligated to respond, to clarify, to justify choices, which fragments attention and reduces emotional clarity. In contrast, those who maintain silence around matters that do not yet require external input conserve energy for the decisions that truly matter. They are able to engage fully where it counts, without dilution. Silence, in this sense, becomes a form of self-respect and mental hygiene. There is also a deeper lesson about human perception. Silence forces patience in observers and discipline in the practitioner. People become accustomed to immediate reactions and instant gratification. The silent individual subverts this expectation. By withholding commentary, by withholding premature explanation, they create space for the work itself to define perception. In other words, results become the narrative. This is not a matter of ego. It is a rational understanding of the causal chain between action and recognition. When you focus on results, you are leveraging the most reliable currency in human interactions: evidence. Words without results are cheap. Results without words are undeniable. Finally, silence teaches self-reliance. When you are not constantly seeking validation, feedback, or recognition, you are forced to trust your own judgment and to evaluate outcomes against your own standards. This strengthens internal discipline and reinforces long-term thinking. Each moment of withheld explanation is an opportunity to practice patience, refine decision-making, and observe cause and effect without external distortion. It trains the mind to tolerate ambiguity, to manage incomplete information, and to act with intention despite uncertainty. These are rare, invaluable skills in a world dominated by distraction, immediate feedback, and noise. Every choice to speak or remain silent has consequences. Speak too early and you trade mental clarity for social reassurance. Remain silent and you conserve energy, protect ideas, and allow work to compound before anyone can interfere or misinterpret. The outcome is clear. Those who master the discipline of silence position themselves to execute with greater focus, to accumulate results without interruption, and to gain respect organically. Silence is not absence. Silence is preparation. Silence is strategy. It is the quiet cultivation of value that will only be recognized when the time is right, yet its effects are evident to those who understand the subtle interplay between energy, attention, and long-term outcomes. Focus is rarely about what you do. It is almost always about what you refuse to do. Most people imagine focus as energy applied, a kind of constant motion toward a goal. The reality is quieter and far less glamorous. Focus is the discipline of saying no. It is the repeated conscious refusal of distractions, of invitations, of opportunities that do not align with the long-term trajectory you have chosen. Every yes carries a hidden cost. Every commitment you take on consumes time, attention, and mental bandwidth. The opportunity cost of a casual decision is often invisible until months or years later, when the cumulative effect of all those small concessions becomes unmistakable. When you say yes to something that does not advance your priorities, you are not simply adding a task, you are subtracting from your capacity to excel elsewhere. This is the subtle but brutally honest arithmetic of life. Every additional obligation dilutes your focus, and dilution is the enemy of mastery. In practice, this principle is far easier to ignore than to implement. Consider a person juggling multiple projects, responding to every message immediately, attending every meeting, and agreeing to every favor requested by friends, colleagues, or family. On the surface, they appear productive, engaged, and connected. From the outside, they may even be praised for their effort and reliability. Yet the internal reality is the opposite. Their attention is fragmented, their energy spread thin, and their capacity to make meaningful progress in any single domain is compromised. Human behavior itself reinforces this trap. People are wired to seek approval and to avoid confrontation. Saying no, even when necessary, can feel uncomfortable. It may provoke disappointment, frustration, or criticism. Many avoid it to preserve social comfort, not realizing that the cost of comfort is stagnation. Every yes accepted out of obligation, fear, or habit is a quiet surrender of long-term opportunity for temporary ease. There is also a psychological element to consider. The human mind overestimates its capacity for multitasking. We convince ourselves that we can handle many obligations simultaneously, that we can contribute everywhere without compromise. Research consistently shows otherwise. Divided attention reduces efficiency, increases errors, and slows progress. The trade-off is not hypothetical, it is measurable. By saying yes too often, we fragment our cognitive resources, and fragmented cognition cannot achieve excellence. Focus, by contrast, requires subtraction before addition. It requires identifying the tasks, relationships, and commitments that do not materially contribute to your growth and removing them, even if doing so feels socially or emotionally uncomfortable. Everyday life offers countless examples of this principle in action. In professional settings, consider an employee or entrepreneur who takes on every opportunity to be involved in multiple initiatives. Initially, there is a sense of progress, a feeling of being indispensable, but over time, results stagnate. Projects miss deadlines, quality suffers, and the individual feels constant pressure without proportionate achievement. In contrast, someone who strategically refuses distractions, who identifies a few high-impact initiatives and commits to them fully, steadily produces results that compound. The visible difference between the two approaches is striking. One is busy but ineffective. The other appears calm but is quietly building long-term advantage. The trade-offs are explicit. Scattered effort delivers shallow outcomes. Concentrated effort delivers deep, sustainable results. The principle applies equally to personal life. Relationships, social engagements, and casual obligations are not neutral in their impact on time and energy. People often underestimate the cumulative effect of minor social drains. Saying yes to every invitation, every minor favor, every casual expectation slowly consumes the bandwidth required for strategic action elsewhere. Saying no is uncomfortable because it triggers social friction or feelings of guilt, but it preserves the essential resource of time for decisions and actions that truly matter. The ability to say no is therefore inseparable from the ability to achieve long-term objectives. Discipline manifests first in small refusals, repeated consistently, before it is reflected in large, tangible results. Another quiet truth about focus is that it demands clarity of purpose. You cannot say no effectively unless you know what your yes represents. Every refusal must be anchored to a principle, a priority, or a strategic objective. Without clarity, saying no becomes arbitrary, reactive, or inconsistent. With clarity, it becomes a tool of power, a way to shape reality rather than be shaped by it. Long-term thinking underpins this process. Immediate gratification tempts people to scatter their attention across many small, pleasing tasks. The disciplined individual recognizes that every yes carries a delayed cost and that deferring gratification in favor of strategically aligned effort is the most rational choice. Sacrifice is inherent in this approach. Saying no repeatedly means missing out on social pleasures, sidestepping minor opportunities, and enduring temporary discomfort. Most people mistake these sacrifices as unnecessary or extreme, yet the reality is that they are the price of meaningful progress. Human behavior gravitates toward comfort, but comfort rarely produces transformative outcomes. Those who accept the discomfort of repeated refusals are quietly constructing a framework within which extraordinary results are possible. This is the arithmetic of focus. Small, repeated sacrifices compounded over time yield exponential advantage. Discipline, patience, and attention management intersect here. Every yes should be evaluated as a trade-off. What am I giving up by saying yes? How will this choice affect my cognitive bandwidth, emotional energy, and strategic positioning? The simple act of framing decisions in this way immediately filters out most distractions. Decisions become a series of calculated trade-offs rather than reactive engagements. In practice, this means observing the subtle patterns of daily life, the way some people consistently demand attention, the way some tasks repeatedly consume more energy than anticipated, the way obligations often multiply quietly until they form an invisible cage. Awareness of these patterns allows a person to act preemptively, to refuse non-essential engagements, and to reserve energy for what is truly consequential. Long-term outcomes are rarely the product of dramatic actions. They emerge from a consistent, rational pattern of disciplined decisions repeated over time. Focused refusal, saying no to what does not matter, creates the necessary space for focus on what does. It allows a person to execute with precision, to maintain emotional and mental clarity, and to leverage effort where it compounds most effectively. Misplaced focus or divided priorities quietly destroys opportunity. Every scattered effort is a missed chance for mastery, for growth, for results that endure. Human nature resists this truth because it is uncomfortable to reject invitations, to refuse social engagement, and to tolerate temporary disapproval. Yet those who endure this discomfort systematically create advantage. This principle, when fully understood, reframes how we perceive engagement with the world. Saying no is not rejection of life. It is selection. It is the rational process of allocating finite energy and time toward the highest value opportunities. Those who master it live in a state of controlled agency, capable of decisive action without distraction. Those who fail to master it drift from one engagement to another, subject to circumstance, opinion, and noise, often exhausted yet unaccomplished. The arithmetic is clear, the psychology is evident, and the trade-offs are constant. The discipline of repeated refusal is therefore not merely a habit. It is the foundation of sustained focus, long-term achievement, and a rationally constructed life trajectory. Not everyone who wants access to you deserves it. The idea sounds simple, but in practice it is rarely applied with the discipline it requires. Most people operate under the assumption that openness, availability, and responsiveness are signs of strength or virtue. They feel obligated to answer messages, respond to requests, and maintain constant visibility, assuming that relationships or opportunities demand unlimited access. The reality is the opposite. Access is a form of leverage, and like any form of leverage, it carries both power and risk. Every time you make yourself fully available, you give someone else the ability to influence your time, energy, and focus. Each interaction has a cost, even if it is not immediately visible, and those costs compound quietly until they begin to dictate the contours of your life. When access is unlimited, boundaries are non-existent, and your mental and emotional bandwidth is fragmented. You might think you are being generous, attentive, or responsible, but in truth, you are surrendering a critical form of control, the control over your own priorities and your own trajectory. The principle extends beyond professional contexts into everyday relationships. Friends, family, colleagues, and casual acquaintances all operate under different incentives. Some seek your presence because they genuinely support your growth. Others seek it because it serves their convenience, their ego, or their immediate desires. Human behavior is predictable in this regard. People prioritize what benefits them, consciously or unconsciously. If your time and energy are always freely available, they will naturally be extracted, often without reciprocation or acknowledgement. This does not make them malicious. It simply reflects the way people respond to opportunity. Access that is abundant is devalued. Access that is scarce is respected. Those who understand this use scarcity intentionally, not to manipulate, but to preserve the mental clarity and emotional energy necessary for execution. Making choices about who gets access and who does not is uncomfortable because it challenges social norms. Saying no, setting boundaries, or limiting interactions can trigger disappointment, resentment, or even conflict. Most people avoid these decisions because they are socially costly in the short term. It feels easier to be present, to respond immediately, to keep relationships superficially smooth. Yet this short-term convenience carries long-term consequences. Every obligation you accept, every interaction you prioritize for the sake of avoiding discomfort, diminishes the attention and effort available for the endeavors that matter most. Human behavior is such that we underestimate these incremental costs because they are not dramatic. They are quiet, slow-moving, and almost invisible until the cumulative effect is undeniable. By failing to control access, you allow the world to impose priorities upon you rather than asserting your own. There's also a cognitive dimension to this principle. Every interaction requires mental process in deciding what to say, how to respond, anticipating outcomes, managing emotions, and adapting behavior. Even seemingly trivial engagements demand energy. When access is uncontrolled, cognitive load becomes overwhelming. The result is reduced clarity, slower decision-making, and a greater likelihood of mistakes. Conversely, selective access creates a buffer against unnecessary mental fatigue. By deliberately limiting interactions to those that are aligned with your priorities, you maintain a higher level of mental clarity, emotional stability, and strategic focus. This is not theoretical, it is observable in daily life. Consider the person who constantly checks messages, fields spontaneous requests, and attends to social obligations without discrimination. Their productivity suffers, their emotional balance erodes, and their ability to act decisively is impaired. In contrast, someone who intentionally restricts access preserves bandwidth for what truly matters, and the results are tangible, clearer thinking, better decisions, and steady progress toward long-term objectives. Access also has a behavioral consequence that is subtle but profound. People calibrate their behavior based on the availability of others. If someone is always reachable, they are subconsciously perceived as less valuable, less disciplined, and less focused. Conversely, when a person exercises discretion in granting access, they communicate without words that their time is intentional, their priorities are serious, and their focus is non-negotiable. Human psychology responds to scarcity and perceived value consistently. By controlling access, you shape not only your own mental space but also the way others perceive and interact with you. Influence, in this sense, is an emergent property of disciplined boundaries, not manipulation. The principle also highlights the trade-offs inherent in human interaction. Every minute spent responding to unnecessary demands is a minute diverted from high-value action. Every hour given freely to people who do not align with your objectives is a reduction in the time available for skill development, strategic planning, or deep work. Opportunity cost is relentless and unforgiving. It is invisible in the moment, but its effects accumulate quietly, like compound interest in reverse. Those who fail to recognize this often reach the end of a day, week, or year wondering why progress feels slower than expected. The cause is rarely a single catastrophic mistake. More often, it is a series of small, well-intentioned decisions to grant access that quietly eroded focus and energy over time. Human relationships themselves reflect this dynamic. Some people are consistently draining, demanding attention, emotional labor, or validation while giving little in return. Others are supportive, aligned, and additive, contributing to growth and resilience. Distinguishing between the two requires rational observation and honest evaluation. It is tempting to ignore these patterns because the discomfort of saying no or limiting access is socially costly. But discomfort in the short term is far less costly than a life structured around external demands rather than intentional priorities. Every relationship, every engagement, every request must be evaluated not on its emotional comfort, but on its net effect on your trajectory, energy, and focus. This approach may feel uncomfortable, even cold to the uninitiated, but it is grounded in rational self-preservation and long-term thinking. There is also a compounding effect. People who control access deliberately create time for deep work, reflection, and preparation. These activities are invisible in the short term, yet they compound into skill, knowledge, and strategic advantage over time. By contrast, those who surrender their attention to every external demand rarely reach this level of depth. They are constantly reacting, rarely creating. Misplaced focus quietly destroys outcomes, and the accumulation of small, seemingly innocuous intrusions is sufficient to prevent the execution of high-leverage actions. Those who master the discipline of selective access, however, generate leverage in both effort and perception. Their actions carry weight because they are intentional, not reactionary. Every choice about access is a trade-off. Making yourself fully available may earn temporary approval, immediate satisfaction, or short-term social ease. Limiting access may provoke criticism, resistance, or discomfort. The difference is stark. One path compounds distraction, fatigue, and diluted focus. The other preserves energy, cultivates clarity, and positions a person for meaningful long-term outcomes. Discipline in this area is not social aloofness. It is rational prioritization, a recognition that time and attention are finite, and that the allocation of these resources determines the quality of results in every domain. It is the recognition that most interruptions are noise, most requests are optional, and most perceived obligations are not essential to your ultimate objectives. To observe this principle in practice is to notice subtle patterns in human behavior. People adjust to availability. If you are constantly present, they expect you to be so indefinitely. If you are consistently selective, they learn to respect the boundaries you establish. Over time, this transforms the quality of your interactions, the level of your influence, and the scope of your achievements. Access becomes a control variable rather than a chaotic one, and every decision about presence or absence carries intentionality rather than accident. This is not an abstract idea. It is the rational calculus of human attention, energy, and long-term success. Discipline is the quiet engine that carries people past the point where motivation dies. Most people overestimate motivation because it is visible, emotional, and easy to describe. Motivation feels like excitement, momentum, or inspiration. It has a pulse, a temporary rush, and people mistake it for the foundation of success. Discipline, by contrast, is invisible, uneventful, and often boring. It is the repeated choice to act consistently, even when there is no excitement, even when results are invisible, even when the world does not notice. Human behavior is predictable in this regard. The brain seeks pleasure, avoids discomfort, and naturally gravitates toward immediate reward. Motivation thrives in that environment because it is emotional. It arrives with energy, but it also leaves with energy. Discipline does not operate in the same dimension. It operates on time, compounding repetition, and internal accountability. To understand the difference, observe everyday life. People who rely on motivation alone start projects, workouts, routines, or investments when the emotional signal feels strong. They feel inspired, they act, and for a moment, progress seems rapid. Then, almost invariably, the emotional spark fades. Without an internal system, the action falters. Workouts are skipped, projects are delayed, learning is abandoned. The trade-off is subtle. Choosing to act only when motivated produces peaks and valleys of effort, uneven results, and ultimately stagnation. Discipline avoids this trap because it is structured, predictable, and independent of feeling. It does not wait for motivation to arrive. It does not require inspiration to initiate. It establishes routines and habits that move the needle consistently, silently, and relentlessly. This principle has deep cause and effect consequences. When someone depends on motivation, they live reactively. They respond to emotional highs and lows, to external signals of encouragement or pressure, to temporary bursts of enthusiasm. The outcome is fragmented performance, inconsistent results, and the quiet accumulation of regret over opportunities that were ignored when motivation waned. Discipline, on the other hand, is proactive. It establishes the structures, rules, and routines that carry action forward regardless of mood or external circumstance. It is the difference between a person who exercises sporadically because they feel like it and a person who exercises at the same hour every day regardless of desire. The latter builds strength, resilience, and consistency that compounds over time, while the former oscillates endlessly between progress and inertia. The subtlety of discipline is that it often goes unnoticed in the short term. Human nature rewards visible effort, grand gestures, and dramatic breakthroughs. The quiet, incremental work of discipline is undervalued because it lacks immediate spectacle. Yet over time, these incremental actions accumulate in a way that motivation cannot replicate. The person who maintains consistent action, even when feeling tired, uninspired, or distracted systematically, gains an advantage that eventually becomes undeniable. The trade-off is clear. Discipline requires patience, self-control, and the willingness to act without reward or recognition in the moment. Motivation offers immediate pleasure but rarely produces lasting results without discipline. Consider the impact of discipline on decision-making. People who are disciplined develop habits that guide behavior even under pressure or uncertainty. They are less prone to impulsive choices because their systems create guardrails that filter options through long-term thinking. Motivation-driven individuals, by contrast, are vulnerable to immediate impulses because their actions are tied to emotion rather than structure. Misplaced focus, reactive behavior, and inconsistent effort quietly destroy outcomes in ways that may not be apparent until months or years later. Discipline acts as a hedge against this vulnerability, preserving energy, attention, and strategic positioning. Discipline also intersects with opportunity costs in profound ways. Every choice we make involves trade-offs. Every hour spent on one task is an hour not spent on another, potentially higher value task. When someone relies on motivation, the timing of their actions is unpredictable, meaning they may act on low-value tasks when motivated and defer high-value tasks when uninspired. Discipline solves this problem by decoupling action from emotion. By establishing consistent routines, priorities, and practices, disciplined individuals ensure that their effort is always aligned with long-term objectives, minimizing wasted time and misallocated energy. Real-life examples of this principle are all around us. The person who builds skills quietly, practices consistently, and invests time in preparation steadily accumulates advantage even if no one notices in the short term. Their performance is predictable and reliable because it is systematized. The person who waits for motivation, inspiration, or ideal conditions stagnates. They start many things but finish few, and when results are eventually required, they lack the reserves of skill, preparation, or knowledge to succeed. Discipline transforms effort into leverage, while motivation alone merely produces transient bursts of activity. There is also an emotional dimension to discipline that is often overlooked. Acting without motivation requires self-awareness and self-honesty. It requires recognizing that desire is unreliable and that feelings cannot be trusted to drive action consistently. This is uncomfortable because it demands confrontation with your own weaknesses, with the truth that you will not always feel like doing the work that matters. Most people avoid this truth because it is emotionally inconvenient. Discipline, however, thrives in this discomfort. By acting in spite of feeling, by prioritizing consistent action over emotional highs, individuals develop resilience, patience, and self-trust. They train their minds to accept that discomfort is normal and necessary, and that the path to meaningful outcomes is rarely lined with immediate pleasure. Discipline is cumulative and compounding. Small acts repeated over time create disproportionate results. This is why routines matter more than sporadic intensity. The person who writes a few hundred words every day, practices a skill consistently, invests incrementally, or studies quietly will, over months and years, accumulate an expertise and advantage that cannot be matched by bursts of motivation. Motivation may launch action, but discipline sustains it. It is the engine that allows progress to continue when desire fades, when attention is distracted, and when external circumstances are uncooperative. The trade-offs are always present. Discipline requires sacrifice. It requires trading comfort for preparation, distraction for focus, immediate pleasure for deferred reward. Motivation, by contrast, seduces with the illusion of progress and the comfort of emotional satisfaction. It is tempting because it feels good and produces visible signs of action, even if those actions are misaligned or inconsistent. Discipline is less glamorous, quieter, and slower, but it is the mechanism by which real leverage, growth, and long-term success are produced. Misplaced reliance on motivation produces inconsistent outcomes. Consistent reliance on discipline produces compounding advantage. The rational way to approach life is to assume that motivation will fail, fluctuate, or mislead. This is uncomfortable to admit because it challenges the instinct to follow excitement or inspiration. Yet by accepting that motivation is unreliable, a person can construct systems, routines, and habits that do not depend on it. Discipline becomes the default driver of action rather than a backup. Every decision, every task, every commitment is filtered through this framework. This ensures that effort is not wasted on fleeting impulses, that energy is preserved for high-leverage activities, and that the trajectory of long-term goals remains intact regardless of emotional states. Finally, discipline is not a moral judgment. It is a rational approach to managing human behavior, time, and energy. It acknowledges that life is complex, unpredictable, and often emotionally taxing, and it responds with structure rather than reaction. It leverages cause and effect reasoning. Consistent action produces compounding results. Inconsistent action produces uneven outcomes. Reliance on emotion produces volatility and risk. Discipline outlasts motivation because it decouples action from emotion, ties effort to systems and priorities, and ensures that the work required for long-term success is completed, regardless of feeling, attention, or circumstance. It is quiet, it is rational, and it is irreplaceable. Delayed gratification is one of the quietest yet most decisive forces in determining who achieves meaningful results and who drifts aimlessly through life. Most people underestimate it because the human brain is wired to seek immediate reward. Evolutionarily, this made sense. Survival depended on acting on what was in front of us, consuming resources when they were available, and responding to immediate signals of danger or opportunity. In modern life, however, this instinct becomes a liability when applied to complex goals that require sustained effort, planning, and patience. Choosing immediate comfort over strategic action is almost always easy, emotionally satisfying, and socially reinforced. Eating what is convenient, scrolling what is distracting, or saying yes to social demands gives instant pleasure. The trade-off, however, is subtle but profound. Every short-term choice to indulge erodes the energy, attention, and resources necessary for long-term success. Delayed gratification, when consistently practiced, acts as the lever that allows compounding effort, skill, and opportunity to accumulate. It separates those who move toward mastery from those who remain reactive to the immediate, and it does so quietly, without spectacle or drama. The psychology behind this principle is simple but often ignored. People rarely calculate the cost of immediate satisfaction because the brain rewards instant pleasure with dopamine, giving a sense of progress or success even when none exists. The thrill of a quick win, the social recognition for minor acts, or the temporary relief from discomfort feels productive, yet it quietly undermines strategic objectives. The person who indulges in instant gratification every day gradually sacrifices hours, resources, and cognitive capacity that could have been invested in higher value activities. Human behavior, left unchecked, consistently favors this path because it is easy, painless in the moment, and socially visible. The challenge is that life rarely rewards the immediately gratifying action with significant, durable results. It is the disciplined deferral of reward, choosing the harder, slower path that consistently produces outcomes that matter. In practice, delayed gratification manifests as the willingness to forego comfort in favor of preparation, consistency, and strategic action. It is the student who studies while friends socialize, the entrepreneur who reinvests profits instead of spending them, the professional who masters fundamentals while others chase trends. Each decision feels small, mundane, or even inconvenient at the time, but the accumulation of these choices creates an enormous advantage over those who prioritize short-term pleasure. The trade-offs are clear. Choosing immediate satisfaction yields comfort today, but compounds inefficiency and lost opportunity over months and years. Choosing delayed reward may feel uncomfortable, socially isolating, or emotionally taxing, yet it produces outcomes that are disproportionate relative to the initial effort. Everyday life is full of micro decisions that reflect this principle. Eating what is convenient instead of what is nourishing may feel harmless, but over time, it impacts health, energy, and cognitive capacity. Checking social media for distraction offers temporary relief but slowly erodes attention and focus. Agreeing to minor obligations because they are easy or gratifying robs time that could have been devoted to high-leverage activity. Each individual choice seems insignificant in isolation, yet they compound. The person who consistently sacrifices the small immediate pleasure for strategic, long-term gain consistently ends up ahead. This is not luck. It is the arithmetic of compounding choices over time, the quiet logic of trade-offs, and the rational execution of long-term thinking. Delayed gratification also cultivates mental resilience. People who consistently seek instant reward build a mind conditioned to react rather than plan, to respond to impulse rather than to principle. Their emotional state rises and falls with immediate stimulus, leaving them vulnerable to distraction, social pressure, and short-term thinking. Those who practice delayed gratification, by contrast, develop the discipline to tolerate discomfort, boredom, and deferred pleasure. They learn that the temporary frustration of saying no is far less costly than the long-term consequences of saying yes to convenience or impulse. This is an uncomfortable truth. Most people avoid deliberate restraint because it feels unpleasant, yet it is the very source of control, leverage, and opportunity. Opportunity cost is embedded in every decision to delay or indulge. Time, energy, money, and attention are finite. Every choice to pursue the easy path diverts these resources from higher value actions. In contrast, deferring gratification concentrates these finite resources on tasks, investments, and relationships that compound over time. It is the difference between short-term survival and long-term dominance. The arithmetic is precise. Small sacrifices consistently applied yield disproportionate returns, while small indulgences consistently applied yield quietly accumulating deficits. Misplaced focus on immediate reward is rarely catastrophic in the moment, but the accumulation of these choices is sufficient to prevent the realization of meaningful potential. Real-life observations illustrate this principle clearly. People who consistently reinvest in themselves, delay consumption, and prioritize strategic objectives often appear patient, restrained, or even cautious to those who focus only on immediate outcomes. Those who indulge immediately appear active, engaged, and socially rewarded in the short term, yet their progress is fragmented and often imperceptible. The results, when measured over years, are unmistakable. The patient, disciplined individual steadily advances, accumulates skills, resources, and credibility, and ultimately achieves results that feel inevitable. The impatient individual, meanwhile, is caught in cycles of distraction, consumption, and reaction, often wondering why effort feels wasted despite frequent activity. Delayed gratification also intersects with social behavior in significant ways. Most social systems are designed to reward visibility, instant response, and immediate action. People who consistently defer gratification may appear less responsive, less engaged, or even aloof. They are often misunderstood because their priorities are invisible, their effort unseen, and their results not immediate. Yet this very invisibility is the source of leverage. By not surrendering attention to external demands or social pressure, they preserve energy for the decisions and actions that matter most. Discipline in deferring reward becomes a form of control over time, perception, and influence. The principle extends to financial behavior as well. People who spend impulsively, chase short-term trends, or consume what is immediately gratifying undermine their long-term security and potential. Those who defer gratification, invest consistently, and prioritize long-term value build a compounding advantage that becomes obvious over years, often decades. The logic is the same across domains. Delayed reward concentrates finite resources on the highest value objectives, multiplies the effects of effort, and produces outcomes that are disproportionately large relative to the initial investment. Finally, delayed gratification is inseparable from focus, discipline, and long-term thinking. It requires awareness of opportunity cost, rational evaluation of trade-offs, and the emotional intelligence to tolerate discomfort for the sake of value accumulation. It is uncomfortable because it contradicts instinct, social pressure, and cultural norms that emphasize immediacy. Yet it is the most reliable divider between those who achieve enduring impact and those who do not. Every choice to defer pleasure, every minor act of patience, every calculated refusal compounds quietly, creating a trajectory that is fundamentally different from the reactive, impulsive, and short-term oriented path followed by the majority. The arithmetic is simple, the psychology is consistent, and the causal chain is clear. Delayed gratification produces leverage, leverage produces results, and results separate those who build meaningful lives from those who drift. Here's the truth most people won't tell you. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to announce your moves. You don't need permission to focus. Stay silent. Stay disciplined. Stay consistent. Let your absence confuse people. Let your results educate them. 2026 isn't about being seen. It's about being built. Move quietly. Work relentlessly. And when the results arrive, they'll be too loud to ignore.